Hey, Ernie, what is that thing over your left shoulder on the wall?
Lumber rack.
A wood rack here. Are you talking this?
No, the thing you had your hand on. Okay, it's a wood rack.
Yeah, I just put it up, the last of it this morning. It's a Bora wood rack. And they're like $38 on Amazon for a pair of them, but I buy 3 and make 2 out of them because that gives you a center one here, and you can then store a greater variety of length.
All you need is a wall to put it on. That's the problem around here. All the walls are vacant.
Yeah, I'm making a video for Bora about it, and that's something I mentioned. They'll hold 120 pounds, but it's only as strong as the drywall or the stud or the screw you use to affix it to the wall.
Yeah.
Well, are the rods fixed in place by when you screw them down tight, they clamp on the C channel?
Actually, there's a little screw periodically here that they rest on.
Oh, okay.
And they're really well designed. They're 11 3/4. I've got one on the other side of this wall that's like 2.5 feet deep. And you got to take everything out of the wood rack to get to the wood you want that's against the wall.
Yeah.
And 1 foot is just right. And it doesn't take too much shop. Nests of cutoffs and stuff that was too good to throw away and should have been. And so it's going to clean that mess up.
I'm thinking
I bought a couple pair from Rockler where the standard is about, the wall standard is about 24 inches long. And then it's like a double row. It's like you might put in a heavy duty closet on steroids. It's pretty substantial metal. Supposedly it's rated at like 460 pounds, but that's going to depend on the screws they provide you with going directly into a stud or through plywood into a stud.
Yeah, I used cabinet installation screws myself, which are very strong.
Yeah.
They're for hanging, cupboards on the wall.
And are the rods themselves round? They look round from here?
No, they're rectangular.
Oh, okay.
They're square. Perfect. They're 1-inch squares, actually. I used a laser level to get them all in plumb and at the same height.
I would have used the board.
Me too.
Then you put a regular level on the board.
These little laser levels, I've got a little Bosch. It's amazing. I use it all the time. But it also has a vertical that you can move around too. So you can put it on the edge of the tube as well and get it just where you want.
I've got a cheap Ryobi one that it works well, but it has a useless suction, a little tiny suction pump in it. And there's a gaskety kind of foot that you stick it to the wall. And in theory, the battery powered vacuum will hold it. Well, I guess if your wall is made of glass, yeah, it would. But if it's made of drywall or plywood, it can't replace the air enough, and it just keeps on falling off,
I have 5 tripods in the shop, so I just put it on a camera tripod. Works beautifully.
Okay, so I have to get a camera tripod then.
Yeah. You can buy a cheap camera tripod on eBay for like $20, and it's a great solution to that thing.
I think I'm like my grandfather might have described, but the one that tends to be more like half a bubble off plum, you might say. So,
well, as long as you know how to read it.
Ernie,
Yes.
a long time ago, I got these, which I use for shelving. But you could use them for a wood rack too. I put my wood on them. They come with a bracket. They go this way, and the bracket goes into the bottom. It has a I don't know if you can see that, a double-ended a bracket holder, and the stanchions, the verticals go on the wall and fasten to the studs. I used something like 3-inch screws to fasten to the wood. I'm not sure what they're rated at, but I got these at the local big box store. This one says Sterling Hardware.
You know, the problem with that, Randy, is that you're going to put up, like, say, 2 rows of shelving. The angle arm effectively keeps the lower row from
Yes.
passing through.
I make the equivalent to that by gluing and screwing webs, triangles of plywood to 2x4s, a 2x4 vertical on the wall, a 2x4 horizontal, couple of plywood triangles, and you're there. And doesn't cost anything.
That's what I have for a set of clamp racks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always welded mine out of angle iron, but I had a cheap, in the day, Sears AC welder that I could tack that stuff together pretty quick. But they were very heavy, and again, I made them too deep always.
John, you've spoiled the fun of having to spend money on your shop if you do it for free.
Oh, I can always spend it on my shop. I just don't want to spend it on lumber racks.
Oh, okay.
I want one of those Oneida dust collectors. That's what I'm jonesing for.
But nowadays, to buy the plywood to make the little brackets, you're not getting it for free anymore. You're laying out $70 for a sheet of plywood.
Well, yeah, there is that.
They just announced today that the average cost because of lumber increase on a home today is $36,000 just on lumber, period.
That would be a modest home, because I've run into some situations around here where the house doubled in price from 2 years ago. But that may be labor too, but I don't know.
Labor's gone high, appliances have gone high, plumbing, electrical boxes. Go buy a breaker box and hold on to your, you think you just bought a safe.
Yep.
But Axel, I'm going to argue that maybe that the price of houses is twice of half of twice of what it used to be, or something. That they're now probably, some people would argue that houses are finally becoming into reasonable prices after being below inflation for so many years. So
always that.
Well, I had a friend that lives behind me. He wanted to move rather quickly, so he put up his house for sale. The realtor came at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he actually asked $20,000 more than he was really willing to take. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a bidding war started, and he got an additional $40,000 over his $20,000 that he wanted, which he didn't think he would get. So basically, $60,000 more, and they signed the contract at 3:30 in the afternoon.
And then he had to pay it all out because he had no place to live, right?
No, he found a place. Believe it or not, he found a place in Maryland. That was the other part. He found something really reasonable, and he grabbed it.
Wow.
The only problem with that is to get the banks to appraise it at the value you bought it for. My son-in-law and daughter just bought a house down here in Maryland, 2 blocks from us, and the lady didn't want to negotiate, and the realtor said, "You're going to not get an appraisal for that," and he was right on the money, so they had to drop the price anyways. If you're going to go, unless you got cash in hand, and go to the closing. So.
Well, on that note, kids, it's 10 o'clock, and this is Lancaster Area Woodturners Coffee Hour number 57. I'm glad to be back from the dead here after a couple days in hospital and a bit of diminishment, I guess you could say. Feeling pretty good today, and looking forward to getting back into the workshop.
We're glad to have you back.
Thank you.
You look pretty good.
I got a short list of things of people who have come up to me who wanted to do something today, and let me see. Show your hands if you want to do something today, so I can just make sure you're either on my list. Okay, got you. Got you. Got you. Roy. Okay. We might not get to you all today. On account of our special guest from last month has returned this morning, Dr. Ellsworth down there in the bottom of my screen, who wants to make a short presentation on design. And I think we'll probably open with that. And then we'll go around the screen and get some of the other stuff up. Unlike last time when we gave David the full hour, we're not going to give him the full hour this time. We're going to treat him like here. And we generally hold our regular players to 20 minutes unless they're fascinating. And then we can let them go on longer. But when you start to drone on about your resume, I'm going to cut you off. You can count on it. Okay, David, you ready to go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm going to spotlight you for the room. Where is it? Spotlight for everybody. Okay, you got the screen, got the floor.
Good. Well, I've got a stack of natural edge bowls here, and that I've been making for the IRDs that I've been doing. And the reason I was interested in presenting them is because I know that the concept of design can be a little intimidating for a lot of people, but it really doesn't need to be. It's fundamentally an element of learning how to see what you're looking at. And in the case of a natural edge bowl, this particular one, for instance, if I can get the light on, is geometrically balanced left, right, and up and down. And it has coloration going around below the sapwood all the way around. It's really quite a nice, simple bowl, but...
Show us the foot, David, please.
What's that?
Show us the underside. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then the second one is a variation from that, especially with regard to the foot. It's got the geometry of the grain patterns in it, but it's on the end of the log, and this is where I'm looking at, seeing what I'm looking at. On the end of the log, I saw this pith area with these turkey tracks going through it and cracks that are all stained. So I decided to do the greatest heresy of all, and that is stick the pith in the bottom of a bowl. But the point I'm getting at is that as you are, assuming you have access to greenwood, as you are working the forms, it's from the very outset when you first cut off the end grain and the log, you're learning stuff from it, and it's that stuff that creates the interest in the bowl from then on. Now, this bowl may not be utilitarian because of the pith in the center, but I still think it's a very interesting transition from the first one. This one here is one you may overlook when you're walking through the woods, but this has got a branch sticking out. So I selected it specifically because I saw the branch on the side of the log, and I knew something would happen inside as we opened it up. It's not geometrically balanced, but it's fairly close, but that doesn't matter. It's a progression, in other words, from the original two that I showed you. And then the third one, this is one of my favorites, is the leopard or the the snake bowl, so to speak. This has got the turkey tracks in the bottom. It's got a little branch over on the left as you're looking at it. And it's got this really wonderful little animal up there on the top. And the more of these things that you play around with, the more you discover when you got the log on the ground, what's possible to do as a quote design. Now, what I try and do is, instead of designing a bowl, is I try and develop it as I go. So I'm learning as I'm cutting away the stuff I know I don't want. And then from that knowledge, I'm changing it between spur center, the drive center, and the live tailstock center in order to get what I want out of it. But I don't know what that's necessarily going to be when I start it out. It's a matter of discovering as you go. So, and the last one I have here is kind of fun. This is a cherry piece. It doesn't have anything to do with geometry, but it's got a nice handle on the side, and I thought that was kind of fun. So that's all I had to say. I've taken my hour long down to about 6 minutes, I think. Any questions that you have, I'm quite happy to field them.
I'll go back to gallery view and let's see if there's questions and comments. Doug.
Yeah, that last one that you made a handle on, I'm assuming when you started turning it, there's a feature on the side of the wood that you saw, or
Yes, there was another branch sticking out of the side
okay,
on that cherry tree.
and if I looked at that closely, there was still a pseudo geometry, even though you said there is no geometry. There is still 2 points on the away from centered between the handles on this. Yes.
Yeah.
Are they sort of centered on the grain when you did it?
They're not centered on the grain. They're balanced, and they are the only element of geometric stability to it. They are at the same height from the floor to the top of the tips.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they would they have gone down the okay? I'm seeing what you're saying, and it does look like it goes down in the center of the grain of the tree.
And the classic annual ring that you get down here in the bottom is achievable if you can put the tailstock point on the line of the pith in the bottom of the form when you first start out, and everything works off of that. But in this situation, I couldn't do that because I was going to lose my bridge up here at the top.
Okay.
So it's kind of fun to play around with, and I'll be quite honest that when I made the shift from dry functional wood, I call it, to green wood, it changed my entire outlook as to what the future of my career was going to be in wood turning, because I realized the wood's talking back to me and I need to listen to it, meaning I need to observe it and then make changes in the shape and the form and the presentation of it at the very beginning as I learn about it, but between the spur center, the drive center, and the tailstock center. And most of those changes are going to be in the tailstock center, but a few of them can be in the top of the drive center.
Are you saying that you mount the wood between centers and then fool around with where the tailstock center is, like try?
Absolutely.
How many different locations would you try?
Well, it depends on what I find.
Well, typically.
Well, 2 or 3. It could be in a, for instance, in the first one that I had, it could be the height of the wingtips. It could be the height of what I call the saddle of the design down in here. It could be the center point down in the bottom where the pith goes through, above the pith.
Well, back up for a second. Back up for a second, David. How are you obtaining and preparing those blanks? Are you bandsawing that out of logs?
No, this is not. It could be bandsawed, but this was not. I was cutting the log off at a certain height and then cutting it in half with a chainsaw and then taking that directly to the lathe and cutting the 4 corners off either with the chainsaw or while it's spinning around and beginning to shape itself. A small bowl like this, the 4 corners are really no difficulty in turning them off while it's spinning around. Now, if you got a 20-inch diameter bowl, that'd be a little bit different. But as I'm roughing it out, I'm learning more about the material and I can make changes as I go. The point being is manipulating the piece is something that when I came into turning, nobody was doing because they were all working with dry wood. And what you see is what you get. But when I went to greenwood, suddenly manipulation became the key to getting the quote design out of the form as I was developing what I was looking at.
So I think all of those bowls have feet, but the design of the feet are not the same. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the design of the feet is pretty much the same on all of them in terms of diameter and certainly location. And it has been undercut on the bottom. But these are decorative objects. They're not intended to be utilitarian, so that the diameter of the foot doesn't really matter. And it's just a matter of elevating it, you see in the silhouette, so that it gives it a sense of lift off the table automatically. If I make that foot any larger in diameter than it is here, say I broaden it out to there, then it looks like it's glued to the table when it sits down.
What do you do when the bark starts to fly off?
Cut the tree in the wintertime instead of the summer or the springtime, and the bark will generally generally stay on, especially with poplar. Now, Bradford pear is another really good one to hold bark. But again, you need to cut them in the wintertime when it's cold. Now, it's not very cold down here in North Carolina, but in Pennsylvania, it certainly was. And the only problem that you have with green wood in case of ash and in poplar is this subbark underneath the hard bark, outer bark, is softer and it will shrink. And when it shrinks, it leaves the wall comes up like this, and all of a sudden there's this root like that, and then the hard bark is on top of that. And that may be a distraction to you when you start to sand it, because the bowl, if you cut it at 1/8 of an inch and then you start sanding it, by the time the subbark starts to dry out and shrink, you're going to have a low spot all the way around that may be a distraction to you. So you may want to cut it at 1/4 of an inch thick and then let it dry and then sand it and get down to the bottom of that depression on the.
So are you talking about sanding on the lathe or off the lathe?
I sand on the lathe when possible, but not while it's spinning, because obviously you would damage the encroaching edge on it. So I use a 5-inch diameter disc, soft foam rubber disc with Abernet mesh. It's not a paper, it's actually a plastic, but it's in different grits from I usually start about 240 and then go up to 600. But I can do that in my lap, you see, once I'm done with it. And especially the very bottom needs to be sanded by hand. But I just love those turkey tracks in there. I think they're just the nuts.
Do you ever sand wet so that you have some, when I get a piece of burl or whatever, you get a different tactile finish because the wood then ripples naturally when it's dried out.
Exactly. And that's why I use the Abernet, because it's a mesh and it can be cleaned. Whereas regular sandpaper, all of the good sandpapers, you can't clean them. Well, you can to a degree, but not to the effectiveness that you want. Pardon me. But yes, that was the boom to me, because I was going through ream after ream of sandpaper before I discovered the Abernet. And
how do you clean it? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, you either shake it out or you blow it out with your air compressor, or you stick it under a faucet, and because it's plastic, so it doesn't matter. After it dries out, and I get that stuff from Steve Worcester down in Plano, Texas. He's got them, and what's the other? Bruce Hoover has it with sandingglove.com.
Yeah.
Now, do you finish those bowls like that? And what do you put on them if you're going to finish it?
If I'm going to finish them, and I'm not, they're off the tool. If I'm going to finish them, I would use a spray acrylic lacquer or a wipe-on poly.
Now, why would you not finish him, or why would you finish him? What's the difference?
Well, the difference basically is that I don't make a living selling open bowls, and I don't want to encroach on other people's right to do that. But I'd rather give them away and let somebody else deal with them in their own time, and enjoy that whole interaction while they're growing with their skills and kind of drooling over what's in front of them and what to do with it, because obviously finishes is a very delicate topic within wood turning and furniture as well. It depends, of course, on the material you're working with, the degree that you've sanded it down or finished it or scraped it with a cabinet scraper, or what species it is, or what you want it to do. If you want it to be a utilitarian object or just a functional or a decorative object. And I found that poplar doesn't receive oil well. It darkens it. So I wouldn't use, for instance, a mahogany oil on it, because it has walnut stain in it. But I could probably use mineral oil. That'll darken it to a certain degree. But if you want it to really hang out and work for you and be handled a lot, wipe-on poly is a great way to go. And it doesn't stain the wood. It doesn't darken it or anything.
Any more questions for David?
Yeah, David, I want to go back to the way you said you mount the piece originally on the lathe. Do you use a spur center at your head? And
Yes.
then are you moving the head at all, or are you just moving the tailstock to center up the piece?
The latter. The reason that I work between centers is clear, but the purpose of using a 4-prong drive center as opposed to a 2-prong drive center is that when you work with a lot of students, they have so many things to think about when they're just getting started, or even in the more advanced areas of their work, they forget to tighten the tailstock. And when that happens, the spur drive starts drilling a hole in the top, in the sapwood of the form, and it stops it from spinning. So the obvious thing you do is you stop the lathe, hopefully, and find out what the problem is, and then clean out the 4-prong spur drive. But the key is that the object will pretty much always stay on the lathe itself when that happens, because you know something's wrong. But if you're working with a 2-prong center, you line it up with the grain so it goes deeper into the wood. That's correct. But if you forget to tighten that tailstock down between every cut that you're making while you're roughing it out, it can slip sideways. And when it slips sideways, that whole thing's going to leave your lathe, and you could be in the way, or the person watching you could be in the way. It's pretty dangerous.
So how much time do you have in one of those things?
I'm sorry?
How much time do you have in one of those bowls?
Oh, about 20 minutes.
Okay.
That's that's the key. That's the difference between experimenting with tools and going with what was always there. And what was always there was a great tool, but it didn't have the side grind on it. And that's the traditional bowl gouge.
The other key is having 40 years worth of turning bowls behind you as well.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt a bit.
David, I have a couple of comments on aligning the grain on the wood. What I do, I try to find as best I can find the center on the drive in, put the spur drive in, and then bring the tailstock up. Then I measure from the headstock over to the border between the grain, wood grain, and the bark. Then turn it 180 degrees and measure again. If it's a ½ inch off, well, then I can raise or lower the tailstock to get that. And I measure the 4 corners, the wide side and the high side and the low side of the bowl. And I can get very, very close to a balanced bowl with the height of the edges. And that's very simple and it's easy to do.
Agreed. What I'm kind of hinting at in here, in working with green wood and working between centers, is that all the early books, Dale's creative wood turning book and everything else, talked about drilling a hole in this case it would be in the bark area or in any piece, drilling a hole in there, putting it on a screw chuck or a faceplate on the top, what's going to be the top of the bowl, because you're going to cut that out anyway. And then bringing the tailstock in to secure it and finish it off. The problem with that is that once you've drilled that hole, you've aligned the grain of the form to the lathe. You're not giving yourself an opportunity to play around with that alignment by changing it, for instance, in the tailstock.
Yeah.
Right.
It's easy to measure to the headstock. In some cases with a natural edge bowl, if you've got a log that has a limb coming out of it, that limb may be a very beautiful area to fix your top of your wing, of one of your wings, and you may end up with one wing much higher than the other, which could be quite exciting to see. Plus that you'll see figure grain going down all the way to the center of the bowl on both the inside and the outside. Excuse me.
Kai, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask David something about design. When I started turning green wood, I pre-turned the bowls thick-walled, and then once dry, I finished them. And what I did, I just discarded everything that had a defect in it. So I just took the nice straight wood, and if there was a big knot or something like this. I just didn't use it. But you seem to look for these defects. So my question is, how did you develop the eye for seeing that you can use a defect or a branch or whatever as an advantage in the design of your bowls? Is it just experience? Did you experiment and try different bowls with defects in it? Or do you actually see it and then say, okay, I can do that with this branch or this kind of knot or whatever?
Yeah, I hear you.
Before Dave answers, Kai, I just want to point out that we in our quality control changed the term from defect to feature.
Okay.
So yeah, anyway, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Well, first of all, I never read the books. So I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Second of all, my background is in sculpture in the fine arts. And I'm constantly looking for oddities and innuendo. And I found it in green wood because I couldn't get it in dry wood. And the reason I was using dry wood is in the mountains of Colorado, all you have is ponderosa pine and aspen, and nobody would buy that stuff. So I was buying dimensional lumber and quickly running out of money because it got to be so expensive. But when I first encountered green material, suddenly this whole new world opened up for me, and looking at something and appreciating what it was and accepting the fact that it was part of the natural growth of the form to begin with, why not include it?
Yeah, well, I like the idea, and I like the idea of including it. But for me, if I have a log, for example, that I got for free because someone felled a tree and gave it to me, and then I sometimes just don't see the thing the way you seem to see it. So I don't see the defect and how I can, or I see the defect or the feature, whatever, but I don't get the idea how to use it to advantage. So what can I do to develop my view and to get into kind of the design mode so that I can say, okay, that's something you can use.
That's shared with a lot of people. And I think that there's several things involved. First of all, don't be afraid to play with the wood. Give yourself the freedom to play and to make mistakes. Because if you're not making mistakes, I don't think you're learning a whole lot. If you're repeating your process and you want to switch that process around or advance your knowledge of that process, that's the key right there, is not being afraid to make mistakes. And just go and see what you come up with and learn a new language, in effect.
I just heard a radio program talking about,
don't put a whole lot of value in each piece at the start. Be prepared to lose it, and you're good.
Sure.
Yeah.
This radio program I heard talking about apprentice of learning culinary cooking, and the professor says you make one mistake every day. That's how you learn. I want to make a comment about Kai looking about for features and so forth. I would imagine David could probably show us a hollow form that has more voids in it than it does wood in some of the things he's made in the past.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it's true. It's quite exciting, actually. Watching the tool work inside while you're turning the outside.
Is that Mike?
Okay, the question I have, David, going back to mounting between centers, since you don't normally move the piece between the headstock, wouldn't there be an advantage then to drilling a hole to reduce the risk of the piece flying off? Not mounting it with a faceplate, not mounting it with a glue block, but still just having that hole to capture the drive center, whether it's a 2-prong or a 4-prong.
I've never tried it, but I do know that from a teacher's point of view, rather than my point of view, that knowing that it's going to drill its own hole, if you don't have pressure up against it, is a valuable tool, because it causes the student to think about what they're doing as they're doing it. In other words, if I put a piece of poplar on, which is soft material and presumably green, and I bring the tailstock up and I start the speed down low and I rev it up a little bit to get a cut active on the wood. Once I make that initial cut, I emphasize the concept of nibbling, meaning using the tip of the gouge to nibble at the 4 corners, or if you've cut them off with the chainsaw, 8 corners as it's spinning around. And then every time you make a cut, you're constantly tightening that tailstock. And it's a great way to get involved in the safety of the form as opposed to the rush to make the form. Because there's always that internal clock that says, I really want to get going. I really want to come up. What I really want is the finished object when I'm first starting out.
What you're really saying is you'll learn more if you lose your focus on the finished object and you get into the process.
Correct. And I think his idea of keeping the center from slipping by drilling a hole is probably a good one, but it's still going to slip because it's soft, wet wood.
It's not the slipping as much as the risk of losing the bowl in a class.
Yeah.
If you're doing one-on-one, I can see the emphasis of encouraging the tightening and you're watching them, or 2 or 3, but once you start getting a class of 8 people, then it seems to me the shift would be more toward safety for the group and reducing the risk of a bowl flying off by just having a little more of a secure area there on.
I agree with that. Yeah. I agree with that, and I have tried that in the past, and it does work. That's true. The real question is, where do you drill a hole? And everybody has different opinions about that.
Well, you indicated that you normally place it right on the pith and get that part first, and then most of the rebalancing is on the tailstock. It looks like you could still do that with.
In this case, the tailstock is on the pith.
Yes. Oh, I got you. So you're saying the adjustment then is at the headstock area, not the tailstock.
No, it's both.
Both.
I would take a spade bit, like an 1.5 inch flat spade bit, and I would drill a hole through the bark and put the drive center there. Then I've got the freedom of adjusting the tailstock center, the live center on the pith or off the pith or wherever, as I'm trimming out the form. And as I do that, every time I make a change, or even before I make a change, every time I make a cut, I tighten that tailstock down to be certain the drive center is secure. And when I get done with it, I can pull it. In almost every case, I can pull the tailstock away, and it'll just sit there hanging on the spur drive because it's drilled itself in 1.5 inches.
Karen Swanton, you got a question? You'll be the last question here. We're on the half hour. Karen, are you there?
It's just an observation. The discussion was talking about the wood as having defects, and I'd rather look at it as the wood telling you what the opportunities are.
Correct.
And I just want to say thank you to Mr. Ellsworth, because I just find your discussions fascinating. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
And that's a wonderful wonderful half of the hour. I'm going to give the other half to a whole bunch of people now. I think I'm going to go next to Dave Delo's video, which is on another note, I guess you could say. I'm going to share my screen if you'll hang on with me.
Great. That'll be my claim to fame. I followed David Ellsworth.
Oh, come on.
To make spheres. And, it's a fun exercise to do. It keeps your tool control skills a little bit up to date. But, sometimes, it's great when you get a cherry burrow like this one, or you have a maple burrow that you turn, or a maple piece that you turn wet that got some spalding in it. You just let it warp whichever way, or you uncover a defect in the wood that you can just leave it that way. But a lot of times you just come out with a real simple shape or a real simple color,
and nothing you can really do about it. It's bland. It's not really very appealing. So, you know, hey, what can you do? You can stain it, you can paint it, you can do a few other things, make a little COVID sphere here, and you know, you can paint them up here like this one, or do a little staining like this beach one was done. But I was interested in doing a couple other things to them, and so I came up with this sphere cutting jig that I'll show you in just a second, but just to put some splits in the sphere itself. And some I leave just naked like that, and other ones I can fill with epoxy and do things, paint them the different color or whatever. But so what I did is one thing about the sphere was the vacuum didn't appeal to me to be a way to fixture these things. So I came up with this jig here that I'll zoom in on, and this is my goofy jig of the week. So what I have here is I have a 1.25" bolt epoxied into this chunk of cherry here, and mounted on a faceplate, and I'm offset from the center line of the spindle 3/4 inch here. And so I have this 1.25" bolt sticking out, and I can attach my sphere cups to that. And then the same thing on the tailstock side, only this one has a 3/4 inch female. But it works very effectively. It's not it's not very pretty, but it does work, and I'll show you that. But the point was the vacuum didn't appeal to me because I didn't think it was safe. And this one's as safe as can be, and I'll just show you how it works right now. So I get this little detailer that I bought off a guy from Woodnet forums. I'll spend this close to $1,000 and just sneak it on in there. And the split will go around the sphere as deep as, depending upon how deep I want to go. So there's just that side, but most of one side there, but a nice, clean, crisp cut. Doesn't take any sanding, and I can paint that a different color to jazz it up, or I could fill it with epoxy or whatever. But thanks for looking at my goofy fixture of the week.
Okay, I've stopped to share, and I should be back in gallery view. Yeah, you guys see everybody? Yeah. Any questions for Dave? I think that's pretty weird, Dave. I would have never thought of that.
Well, hey, David Reed Smith, I am not. Okay, that's primarily where I got the idea. He's done some really nice things with spheres and doing different designs with it. And at the time, I thought I was going to make some of those things like he did, but that he was my inspiration for coming up with a way to hold these off center or eccentric, whatever you want to call it.
As a matter of a historical reference, you might want to check out the work of Christian Burchard.
Oh yes.
Dave, you sort of glossed over the tailstock mounting, because I can see how the headstock was mounted on a faceplate or something like that. But the tailstock, did you drill a hole into the wood deep enough so that?
Yeah, there's a hole drilled in the wood, and then a thread, 3/4 inch thread to match the tailstock. Okay. And
okay.
I screw that onto the tailstock, and then in between there's a sandwich there where I have the bolt, the 1.25" bolt that goes into the bottom of the cup center. Okay.
Okay. So
Hey, what kind of RPM were you turning there? It was kind of hard to tell with the framing.
That was close to 1,000. Close to 1,000.
Oh, that's a lot higher than I thought. With I didn't see any chatter or shaking of the lathe.
It does at about 400. I get a little bit of chatter, but as you go up, you get rid of the resonance or what the chatter, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Anybody
But
else?
a fun project, a goofy project.
That's for sure. Anybody else? Questions for Dave?
It's 3/4 of an inch. It seems further off than typically a lot of off a multi-axis turning. Do you find the 3/4 about right, or do you think if you had to make it again, you might make it a little less, more like
for that?
3/8?
I have some of the larger the oak pieces that I did first. I was just guessing at what would be a good figure to start with. And so that sphere was, what is it, 4 inches? And that seemed to work out pretty good. And for a smaller one, if it's like a 2-inch, that'd be quite a bit. Because I was interested mostly in doing, I wanted to make a face. And I wanted to make a face with eyebrows and everything. So it would have to be a little bit closer than that. Or I would need to be adjustable. And that's where I saw the David Reed Smith. He has this adjustable cup where you can do, but it was a little bit more involved in making that than what I want to do.
Some of his are a lot of engineering.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Dave? Then I'm going to say thank you very much. Ernie, you got some Chuck stuff you wanted to talk about. Are you there? You got to unmute.
Yes, I am here. You ought to be seeing some Chucks on the table here.
Yes.
And I'm doing a review of new things in turning for a Christmas issue of Woodworkers Journal. And I got 2 new Chucks in which are different. This is a Vic Mark and this is Nova. Both of these are on what I call the pantheon of Chucks, the ones that are, you can unconditionally recommend to buy. The big news from the Nova isn't startling, but they've finally, after all these years, gone to a right-hand scroll. When you turn this to the right, it closes. When you turn it to the left, it opens. The Latimers, originally, they made the first really lever chuck in wood turning. And at that time, nobody had figured out to safety the jaws. It was first done by going to the number 4 keyway, which would be right there, and putting a screw or a pin down there so that you couldn't go off the scroll. Because a common industrial accident or wood turning accident nowadays is to lose grip on the number 4 jaw while it's turning and it goes ballistic and hits you. Not a good outcome. It's mostly done today internally, but the reason the Latimers did that was that if a chuck's idling on a lathe with it's not holding anything, the inertia of a right-hand scroll will cause it to open with the number 4 flying out first. So their idea was to reverse it so that it closed. Good idea for a non-existent problem today. And if you're teaching workshops, they're always nigglesome because it turns different from every other chuck in the house. But they've done a beautiful job. It's all finished beautifully. You have a ball driver to drive the bevel gears in here. And they've gone to torque drive screws to change the jaws. I'm not sure I'm happy with that because now you need a different driver for that chuck.
Is that a
from
record
every
chuck, you say? That was record, that one?
This one is
Axminster.
Axminster chuck, exactly. And they've always been I believe, predated Nova in the market, and they build a beautiful chuck. This one's entirely built in the UK, but I left them out of the third edition of the lathe book because they're really not distributed. You have to send to the UK for them. Well, the Woodturners store in Long Island is now stocking them, and it's really a beautiful chuck. First of all, it's all stainless steel. You can't get a magnet to stick to it, Barry, so you may want to beware of this chuck. But for a screw center, you just simply drop this in there, and these jaws close over that ring, and it's perfectly centered, which I like better than the average screw that we get in most chucks. Especially with beginners, it's hard to get them to realize that they have to put the screw down in here, get it under the top jaws generally, and then close with the 4 jaws on the flat of the screw. And to come up centered, it takes some experience. Another nice thing is you can drop this in there and close it, and you now have a Morse taper receptacle to put, say, a spur center in if you're doing the natural edge work like David is doing. But if you decide to turn a tenon on the piece, you can then close the chuck on it. You also can get these rings, which you do it in hold on. This has a dovetailed jaw here outwards, and this is tapered inwards. So you can put this down and lock on, and you have a faceplate. And with 2 or 3 of these extra, you could quickly change between different pieces of work you were doing. My only ding on the chuck is they give you a little hex key rather than a good driver for changing the jaw.
Now, what's the retail on a thing like that?
I was sent a complete package with some more jaws and everything, and it was around $455, I think.
Well, if you want, it depends how involved we want to get with dinner.
Okay.
I mean, they're the only ones with the O'Donnell jaws, right?
I'm not sure of that, to be honest.
Okay, that's fine.
But they do have a startling array of jaws. I looked online, and they, on the external hold, they have what they call a hook here, which digs into the wood and holds quite well.
Mike Peace, you've got a question?
Yeah, we've got a very skilled wood artist in our club who also bought a couple of Axminsters and said they're some of the best chucks that he's seen. But going back to the Nova, Ernie, are they abandoning their original righty-loosey design?
I'm in fervent hopes that they are, Mike, because I finally stopped using them in workshops because they're just different from everything else in the shop.
Well, the one thing that I've noticed, I've done some reviews on comparable chucks to Nova, and that's the Robert Sorby Patriot chuck and the Record Power that has an SC3 and SC4 that is almost a direct knockoff of the Nova in size, weight, appearance, and style, but both of those others are righty-tighty, lefty-loosey like everybody else, and it appears to me from my observations that they were slightly better machined than the Nova, but they did cost a little bit more. Nova, does a great job on marketing with lots of specials and adding jaws and discount prices. So from a value viewpoint, Nova's pretty hard to beat if you're watching for their specials.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Mike, because I've looked at both of those chucks, and they appear like they were almost made in the same factory on a better day where they had different workers or just paid a little more for higher grade workmanship. Asian manufacturing doesn't have to be bad. It's just the average guy goes over there and pounds to a price lower than they can really produce it for, and they get what they paid for. But I've used the record power chucks. I have one for a 1-inch thread in the shop, and they're beautifully made. And again, they're a duplicate of a Nova.
All of that brings up, I think, an important point that I rarely see mentioned, especially for the beginner. You really need to pay attention to what chuck system you're buying into, because if you get that wrong and you spend a few $100 on jaws and accessories, and then you change to another chuck, you're going to spend another few $100 on jaws and accessories, and you'll wind up like I am. I've got 3 brands of chucks going in my shop. And I can't afford to complete the line with any of them. It's very difficult to figure that out when you're starting out. What line of chucks do I want to get into?
Well, that raises the point of going back to the Nova, the Robert Sorby, and the Record Power. All of the jaws have the same basic fitting.
They swap out.
They swap out. You do have, if you're using the original Novas and if you swap in manufacturers, you do have to alternate the 2 and the 4 jaw, because for the chucks that are turning in a different direction. But other than that, they are interchangeable.
John has a great point. The problem is that different manufacturers have different jaws, and I find lately I'm not just looking for a chuck, I'm looking for a particular jaw set, which drives me to buy another chuck, which I don't necessarily want to do. But I find that's more of my determining factor today of which chuck I wind up with.
My problem is that when you're dealing with these chucks, having interchangeable jaws on them is great, but then I'm spending an awful lot of time interchanging jaws. So I buy a second chuck, so I don't have. So I've got one that's actually the one standard one, and so really, if you're getting into serious, I would imagine the guys that are seriously doing wood turning as far as production turning have multiple sets of chucks and multiple sets of jaws, just for the sake of not having to change them out all the time.
Exactly.
Richard Raffin says nobody needs more than 11 sets of chucks.
I agree with that, actually. That I also have a huge pile of metalworking chucks with a South Bend lathe in the back room. So I probably have 20 chucks in the shop.
Well, you guys who are experts, what brand of chuck would you recommend to a beginner? I mean, One Way or Nova or
Record Power?
Record Power. Why?
Again, because the design, their design looks very much like the Nova, virtually identical. They have 2 models that line up exactly in comparison to the Nova's Supernova 2 and their G3 chuck, but they are righty-tighty. The engineering on them, as Ernie stated, appears to be a little bit better. The jaw glides are about 20% beefier, and the jaw sets are virtually identical, most of them, to the Nova, except they have at least one that Nova never had the jaw that fit in that area, and that's one slightly smaller than their standard jaw set. So if you do a lot of ornaments and smaller spindle kind of work, you frequently find out that a piece less than 2 inches, you put a tenon on it, won't fit in the normal jaws, but they've got a smaller jaw set, which I like. And in a couple of their jaw sets that appear to be virtually identical to the Novas, they have actually done a couple of refinements, which shows they're really paying attention to detail. An example would be their pin jaws, the kind that you would typically drill a little bit, 1 1/8 inch hole, and then stick these jaws in for a large block and expand it into that hole. They have square shoulders, whereas the Nova, they're slightly rounded, so they won't really register against the bottom of the blank. a couple of them that have serrations on the inside, they have the serrations all the way to the bottom. So if you're doing a large piece where you're grabbing a piece of spindle kind of rough stock, and you're not relying on the shoulder based on the type of work you're doing, you have more grip on it. So I like the record power.
I agree with Mike. I bought a SC4 recently, and I love the deep gripper jaws they have for bowls. And I think I bought the chuck originally for those long nose jaws, which give you a 2-inch extension, which is really great for some particular spindle cases. But well-made, reasonable price. I think the initial chuck set is like $200, and it is well made. I think it's very well machined.
And the Talon, our club has Talons the one-way. They're very well-made chucks. Now, I've never heard anybody complain about the quality of the one-way chucks, but they come with a proprietary jaw design that every professional turner that has come to our club for workshops takes a moment, people like Stuart Batty, and explain why that their jaw set will tend to cause creep on grabbing a tenon because of their proprietary design with serrations that make it more difficult to rechuck and have it run true, but it also tends to creep. So I don't like the one-way Talons, even though they're popular with a lot of people.
Well, another thing about the one-way set is the number 2 jaws and the next size up, there's a blind spot there. You can't grip something that's 3 inches. There's a gap in the side.
Don't have the overlap, yeah.
You don't have the overlap, and the Nova overlaps that. I have a Nova chuck specifically for bridging that little gap, because I often wind up trying to fit the tenon on a very fancy little box into it, and oops, it's not going to go.
The other challenge is when you're beginning wood turning, you don't want to buy expensive chucks, so you end up buying PSIs or something like that, and then you have them for the rest of life. But like you say, you just make it one of the 11 you own. So
are you saying that it really would be wise of the beginner to suck it up and invest in a good set of chucks?
I would say buy a decent one. Nova, as Mike pointed out, is generally got some aggressive price point on there. And a lot of my students end up buying those, even though I would recommend a different chuck. I like one-ways, but I use mostly the Stronghold, which is the bigger chuck. And their centering system for the backs is the best in the business because it's on a Jarno taper. And Vicmark is a beautiful chuck, but really for big lathes for the most part, and quite expensive. But their machining is beautiful. It's a great chuck. But the problem with the PSI chucks is they're made in a way that metalworking chucks were made in up through the 1960s. And that is that the jaws are put in the scroll, and then the inside and the outside faces of the jaws are machined to that scroll. And so they're one-offs. If you need to buy a new jaw for some of these chucks, you will have to buy a whole new chuck.
In addition to what I've seen and heard from people that have used them a long time that are serious woodworkers, but started with a PSI Barracuda type chuck, is the metal used in some of the gears and the stress points that after a while, after a few years of heavy use, depending on how heavy you use them, you will get some wear and slop that you don't get in all of the better quality chucks that have better grade metals.
The other thing Nova did was they got smart marketing wise. They started including G3 chucks with all their smaller lathes like Comet and the 14-inch one. And that was a good choice. It got people into a better chuck, but also got them into their line.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I've not heard anybody ask for is quick change jaws. There is, of course, the Easy wood chuck, which has quick change jaws, and I will not use that, especially in a workshop with students, because I don't trust the locking system on it. I don't know how you feel about it, Mike, if you've tried one or not, but the other one is Nova brought out a quick change jaw system and has withdrawn it. The first one,
Recalled
I
it.
got a call just after I got it, and they said, don't use it. We'll take it back. They sent a second one, and they never said anything, but they've withdrawn it from the market and given up on quick change jaws. So,
which leads me to my concern. Nova, they make a good chuck, and they've been around a long time, and typically, as you mentioned, maybe Axminster had the first good woodworking scroll chuck, but Nova seems to get credit for it. Is despite all that reputation and experience, that they had such a massive failure, as you pointed out, Ernie, with when they introduced those quick change jaws, that it gives me some concern.
well, in early Nova lathes, shoot, I had a lot of board failures, and I waited as long as 3 weeks for a board. I think that's in the past now, but the one thing about DVR technology is if a variable frequency control fails in any of the other lathes in the shop, I can go on Amazon and have something that will make it run by tomorrow, where you are absolutely tied to the company for the boards for a DVR motor.
And you talked about inserts. The Nova registers, their insert registers on the inside of the chuck where you can't see it. You have to really crank it down with a wrench to get it to register. And I've seen people on forums where they'll say it's not running true. It's primarily because they didn't crank it down tight enough, so it was so difficult. But with the record power, that insert registers on the outside where you can see it, and it's machined so well, it just goes schnick, 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 and then it's registered. You can see the registration, which is a huge improvement over the Nova registering on the inside.
Now I see Axel.
Well, as a
hold on, Ernie, a second.
As an educator,
Ernie, I have a question. When you gave the price of the Axminster a unit there, you showed you broke up. What is the cost of that unit?
It was around $455, but that's with 2 sets of jaws. I have a great big set of dovetail jaws with it. It has all these other bells and whistles on it. I really think this being able to put a Morse taper in it is a really good idea. And so it was a complete package, if you will. I imagine the Bear chuck is probably somewhere between $250 and $300. I may have the invoice around here somewhere, or I'll come up with the data for before John sends out the follow-up to this Zoom session.
And on that note, guys, you've just passed another delightful hour with the Lancaster Area Woodturners Thursday morning coffee hour, which is now officially over, but I'll leave the screen open and if people want to chit chat or exchange emails with one another or whatever. And thank you all. Thank you especially to David for showing up again, and Mike Peace and you other famous guys. It's been a real